Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, Linking Circular Economy and Climate Change Mitigation, the Carbon Footprint of Municipal Waste. My name is Gaëlle, and I'll be moderating today's session on behalf of ACR+. We have ahead of us an insightful 90 minutes packed with lessons from the More Circularity, Less Carbon campaign on how cities and regions can significantly reduce emissions associated with waste. So I will not present yet this campaign because my colleague will do it in a minute. But just while we wait for others to join, I will quickly walk you through today's agenda. Yes, perfect. So we will have three parts. The first one will be to present you the More Circularity, Less Carbon campaign. So Jean-Benoît Bell, my colleague, will present the activities, the objectives. Then we have Donald Chapman from Zero Waste Scotland with us, who will tell us everything about the Carbon Metrics International, which is the tool that was used within the campaign. And after, once you will know how the tool works, Jean-Benoît will come back to tell us about the results and the lesson learned of the campaign. After this first block, so we will take some questions, and then we're lucky to have with us Philippa King from the Southern West region in Ireland. The Ireland was one of the territories that joined the campaign, and so Philippa will share with us her experience, or the experience of Ireland, how the campaign was useful also to work on their waste plan and how this waste plan is integrating climate change. The last part of this session is a roundtable where we welcome two more guests, so Marie-Jeanne Kartner from Reuse and Manon Jourdan from Zero Waste Europe. So all together we will discuss prevention policies and binding targets, if it is the only way forwards to reduce climate change. Just before we start, the usual housekeeping notes. You all muted. Please stay muted, but normally you shouldn't be able. But if during the questions you want to talk, just raise your hands and we can open your mic. This session is recorded. We will be sharing the recording and the slides afterwards. As I said, we will be taking some questions at the end of each part. We'll try. You can ask them throughout the presentation simply by writing in the chat window. We want this to be an interactive and inspiring session, so of course we warmly invite you to ask a question. Don't be shy. Without further delay, I will give the floor to Jean-Benoît so we can learn more about the campaign.
Thanks, Gaëlle. Thanks, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. Yes, I will introduce the More Circularity, Less Carbon campaign. It was a campaign, an internal campaign for ACR+ that we launched a couple of years ago. And maybe to start a bit of context, so in 2018, we had the signing ceremony of the Paris Climate Agreement, where every country is agreed to keep the increase of temperature to 1.5 degrees by 2100. And even though we are not really in the right trajectory right now, this is still a commitment that the EU is trying to keep, and that means reaching net zero emission globally in 2050. When doing the campaign, we had an overview of how much circularity could help, and it turned out that there's different assessment, but in general, it is considered that food and material consumption account for a bit less than half of the European carbon footprint. So it tells us that first, circular economy has a very significant potential impact to mitigate the impact of climate change, but also that we won't reach net zero emission without engaging into circular economy at the full scale. There's also a bit of context. So this is mostly based from a European Environmental Agency study from last year, but this was also something an observation that we did when we started the campaign. It's the fact that circular economies are included in climate policies and in reporting. There's several reasons behind that. First, the cross-cutting nature of circular economy makes it difficult to report in a consistent way. It's also difficult to measure how much circular economy can contribute to climate change because it requires assessment, modeling, and this is also something we experience with the campaign. It also means including, let's say, material resource consumption, also means to shift from a production-based monitoring to a consumption-based focus. And in most cases, but this is also true for circular economy, the link made in climate policies is mostly on waste management and not necessarily on more impactful aspect of circular economy. And with this context in mind, this is some of the reasons why we launched the More Circularity Carbon campaign. The initial idea was to support some of our members with the assessments of the carbon footprint of their waste, and to understand what it means to reach minus 25% by 2025, like how much effort it would require to decrease the carbon footprint by 1/4 within 5 years. So the idea of the campaign was mostly to support some of them with the assessments of their local carbon footprint associated with municipal waste. To do that, we did 3 cohorts of members, one in 2020, one in 2021, and one in 2022. And we relied on the tool developed by our member, the Waste Scotland, that will be introduced by Donald just after my presentation, and from our member to collect data. The tool will be introduced at the later stage, but just to give you an idea, the idea is to go from local waste data, so how much is generated, what's the composition of extraction, and where it's going, the final destination. And the tool is organized in a way that you also assess local emission factors, meaning conversion factors that will turn waste quantities into carbon emission. And this is assessed according to different parameters, such as the waste transport distances, what recycling routes are in use, the treatment routes, and it gives you a carbon footprint, but not only the impact of waste management. The tool has a strong point that is it assesses the embodied impact in waste, meaning the carbon emission that were required to that were emitted during the production of products that when became waste. So the tool not only gives an overview of the impact of, let's say, recycling, landfilling, incineration, but also how much carbon we throw away when we throw away waste. Those are the participating territories. So we had the first cohort with the French region Pays de la Loire, the Brussels regions in Belgium, and the city of Genoa. Then we had 3 more participants with the city of Odense, Denmark, the whole Ireland, because the 3 regions are ICF Plus member and they provided data for the whole country, and the province of Navarra. And then we had a smaller cohort at the end with only the city of Belfast. So it's an interesting mix of different levels, regions, cities, countries, but also very different territories in terms of context, which gives also an interesting take on the link between carbon emission and waste management. I will detail the results when you know how the tool works, so that you can get a better understanding on the results. But just to give you some outcomes of the project, it was mostly dedicated to support some of our members. So one of the key deliverables was to provide individual reports for each member explaining the data, the carbon footprint, and explaining how the waste management system impacted this carbon footprint and what they could do to prevent, to reduce the emissions. We also did, as part of another project, an analysis of the evolution of the waste carbon footprint in the province of Navarra, meaning that we took several years, and we saw how the policy impacted these carbon footprints. And yeah, the final deliverable is this cross-analysis of the 7 participants. So you've got the link to the report on the slide. The report goes through all the data that we collected, and we try to better understand this link between waste management and carbon footprint, but also understand how the differences impact the carbon footprints, and if we can figure out some key recommendations for cities and regions to shape their waste policies so that they effectively address climate change. This is it for the first presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention, and Gail, I give it back to you.
Thank you. And I will be quite brief, just transitioning to Donald from Zero Waste Scotland, because I'm sure that now you all wonder what is this tool that Jean-Benoit already briefly presented. Donald, you can share your screen.
That worked. Think so.
Yeah. Loading, yes.
Loading, yes. Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Works.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll present a little bit about the Carbon Metric International and the methods that we used to calculate some of these carbon emissions of waste. Quickly, brief background about who Zero Waste Scotland are. We are Scotland's circular economy public body. Easy for me to say. And we work with government, businesses, communities, general public to really promote the circular economy as something that is helps us achieve our climate and environmental ambitions while also allowing prosperity for all. So yeah, the Carbon Metric International, as Jean-Benoit has discussed, we used this model to calculate the carbon impacts of waste in cities and regions outside of Scotland. So it was based on our own carbon metric, which we've published since for about more than 10 years now. And we adapted it for the use in this project. And it really, what we do is we consider the impacts of lots of different waste materials. Ideally, all of the waste materials that are covered by that are collected by municipalities and cities and regions, and we look at the different stages of that life cycle. The tool is based on life cycle analysis, so it's rooted in that methodology. That scientific grounding, I think, is really important in this case. I guess a little bit more in the background of why we would want to look at the carbon impacts. This is some data from Scotland, in fact, and it shows just that relationship between how much waste we produce and the carbon impacts is not exactly one-to-one. So whilst we might reduce how much waste we're producing, we're not necessarily reducing our carbon impact or vice versa. So it's really important to think about the kinds of waste we are producing and whether we are dealing with it and managing it optimally. Yeah, as Jean-Benoit mentioned, we looked at not just how we manage and treat waste, we also consider the impacts of all the energy and materials that go into producing the product or the material that ultimately becomes waste. And this is really important when you think about the waste hierarchy and all the different R strategies in the circular economy, as it really shifts the focus away from just managing to thinking about how we can reduce this amount of waste that we're producing in the first place. So the impacts covered are anything that is all the materials and energy used to extract resources, and all the emissions associated with manufacturing, and everything used to transport the product or the material to its point of retail. We then pick up that waste again. Once it becomes waste, we include the transport of that waste to the various treatment facilities, which include recycling, incineration, and landfill. Importantly, we consider the benefits of recycling in terms of material recovery. So if we recycle plastics, then we might consider the offsetting the production of virgin plastics as a result of the use of that secondary plastics instead. And indeed, if energy is recovered from waste incineration, then we also consider that as a benefit as well. And we also, of course, consider landfill. And what we see, this is not an example from this campaign, it's an example from Scotland, but it's just to hopefully get, first of all, not take away from Jean-Benoit's presentation on the results, but just to put it all in context and see how this comes together. So what we see here are some of the major waste streams that cause impacts, and we see the big bright blue bar is those embodied impacts, those ones that occur before the material or product even becomes waste. And you can see that the impacts, the total impacts, are dominated by those embodied impacts. But that's not to say that treatment isn't important. If you look at all the green boxes that are negative, they're below the zero line. If I put on a pointer, yeah, this zero line here, everything below that has a negative impact, which means it has a benefit. And you can see here that recycling does offset some of those embodied impacts, depending on the waste stream. But we do see, purple here is landfill impacts and orange is incineration impacts. In some cases, incineration is beneficial, but as with plastics, we can see that incinerating plastics has a big, quite a large impact. So what this brings out, and I'm sure Jean-Benoit will go on to discuss this, is some of the major impact categories are food waste, textile waste, plastic waste, paper and cardboard, and discarded equipment, which is basically waste electronics and electrical equipment. And these are the most impactful waste streams, and doing something like the carbon metric allows us to identify these most impactful waste streams, and indeed where in the life cycle that these impacts occur, in order to choose the most appropriate strategies to deal with them. So how we actually did the Carbon Metric International, we needed a lot of data from the municipalities or the cities and regions that were part of the study. We needed data on the different waste types at the different stages, where they go. So, for example, how much plastics are incinerated, how much plastics are recycled, the composition of those plastics or other material streams as well. So how much PET is in plastic, how much polyethylene is in the plastic waste stream. But the waste composition is especially important for that residual waste. So everything that is essentially not source segregated, everything that goes into your generic waste, that's quite an important data point that we need. We also collect data on energy from waste efficiencies, transport also where available, the transport distances, for example, where it's going. Fundamental to all is the LCA database. Now, this was not data that we collect from the municipalities, but this is the data that we use as part of the model in order to calculate the impacts. Some of the limitations we faced during the campaign was the explicit modelling of some aspects was not included. For example, exporting waste to another country, the specific impacts of that were not considered. But all waste is considered. It's just not necessarily make that distinction of whether it's exported or whether it's retained in the city or region or country. And where there was missing data, which in some cases there was, we either used assumptions or we fell back on what we used for Scotland. So that explains the model. I'm going to use one slide just to talk about where we've gone since the carbon metric, and that's to something called SWEFT, which stands for the Scottish Waste Environmental Footprint Tool. And here we're not just considering the impacts on carbon, we're also looking at 5 additional impact categories, and we really chose this as saw this as important, just to obviously the focus is on climate change, and that is very important, but there are very additional environmental impacts that are also important and that can help to shine a light on where a particular waste stream is causing a particularly high impact. So the other impacts we looked at here were biodiversity loss, air pollution, mineral resource scarcity, which is essentially resource extraction and metal depletion, also water consumption and land use change. So this is the thinking where we're going at Zero Waste Scotland, to really expand our look at waste into more than just carbon. And I can talk a bit more about that later. Okay, I think that's me.
Thank you, Donald. Yeah, the very comprehensive presentation of the tool. And so now it's time to see exactly how the tool was used and what it brought to the territories of the campaign. Jean-Benoit again.
Yes. Yeah, it's me again. I'm going to introduce the results of the campaign. Donald already introduced part of the findings, because you will see there's quite some similarities with the figures he presented. Maybe first, because the idea, the initial step of the campaign is to collect data on waste. So just to give you an idea of the diversity of figures that we got from the participating territories, you've got on this graph the waste generation and the composition of municipal waste in the different territories, the 7 participating territories. And well, if you work on waste data, then this is not news for you, but data really show very significant differences among territories. Maybe some explanation behind that. Composition can be linked with consumption patterns, but there's more to that. In general, we know that the scope of municipal waste is very different from one territory to another, especially the inclusion of commercial waste, for instance, which is, I don't think there's commercial waste in Ireland and hardly any in Brussels, but there are in other territories. And the inclusion of certain waste fraction, like you've got construction and demolition waste in Odense, on Pays de la Loire, which is not necessarily reported in the other territories. So there's a difference between the quantities, let's say, and then composition is very different depending on the typology or consumption patterns, as I said. There's also something that is important, is that we are aware that in many territories there are also unreported quantities. Simply, if you take food waste in some places, there's lots of home or decentralized composting that might divert some food waste from the municipal services. And those quantities are not necessarily well reported or hardly reported. Same goes with fractions like WEEE or textile that are managed outside of the municipal service by maybe reuse organizations or PROs. And then we know that at local level, this is not necessarily data that municipalities have. So it explains the differences. Then when you look at treatment, there's also quite a diversity in our panel. So there's recycling rates ranging from, let's say, 1/3 to a bit more than half of the municipal waste. And also the way unsorted fractions are processed. There are some countries or territories with lots of incineration, and other mostly relying on landfills, when others are also using MBT, so mechanical biological treatment. So it gives us quite a diverse panel when it comes to waste generation and treatment. And what does it give in terms of carbon footprints? Then I'll start with this graph showing the impact of the different stages, starting with waste management and with incineration. And right now we see already a difference. So in most territory, incineration has a negative impact in terms that it emits more emission than it saves, except in one of the participating territory, that is Odense. In Denmark, it's linked with the energy efficiency of their units, the fact that they produce much heat, and also the local energy mix that the energy is substituted to. So connected with the composition of waste that is burnt, actually, depending on whether it contains lots of fossil-based carbon or not. So already one difference. Landfilling has a negative impact regardless of the territory. It's connected with the quantities of biodegradable waste landfilled that produce methane. And then recycling has a positive impact in all territories, more or less depending not only on the quantities recycled, but also the type of recycling and what's recycling. But in general, what it gives in that on waste management, the balance, like the carbon footprint is either neutral or even negative, meaning that the waste management allows to save emissions. So it means that all the saved emissions, thanks to recovery, be it energy recovery or material recovery or reuse, balances or offsets the emissions with collection and treatments. But then if you add the embodied impact, meaning like the carbon in waste that are thrown away with the waste, the story is completely different. And you can see that here the balance is not necessarily positive. So two things, and it was also the same on Scotland's data. The embodied impact is massive compared to the waste-related impact. And the emissions saved by the current waste management practices hardly reduce the total carbon footprint of waste. So even though the impact of the waste management is positive, it's not necessarily solving the issue of the carbon footprint of the products. When it comes to compositions, also very similar results compared to Scotland. There's a top three, the same usual suspects in all territory: textile, food waste, plastics, a bit of paper and cardboard in some territories, depending on the composition. And this observation is true regardless of the composition. You could see that the composition quite greatly varies among the participating territories. It does not change the fact that those three are the main contributors, and those three contribute to more than half, sometimes more than 2/3 of the carbon footprint of municipal waste. It's also interesting to see that there's no connection between the weight that they represent. If you take textile, I think it's about 5% of municipal waste in terms of tons, but it's 1/3 of the carbon footprint in some places. There's also some differences with the carbon factor. So those carbon factors represent how much emission you generate when you produce or treat 1 ton of waste. And this is for waste generation in different territories. There's difference among the different participants. For food waste, the main driver will be the presence of protein, meats in waste that will increase the carbon impact, the embodied impact of food waste. For plastic, it's also a question of composition. Like if there are more hard plastics than other fraction, it might increase a bit more the carbon footprint. Same goes with savings. So recycling 1 ton of, let's say, food waste in one territory is not the same in terms of carbon saving than in another one. For instance, in Navarra, we have more saving associated with food waste linked to the fact that they produce biofertilizers that is substituted to chemical fertilizers. For textile, there's also huge differences, and it's mostly linked with the, let's say, the importance of reuse in the recycling figures. Right now, recycling does not yield any benefit in terms of carbon saving, as far as we know. So all the savings come with reuse, and depending on how much reuse is important, then the saving associated are more or less important. So in terms of key conclusion, it's mostly many similarities. The impact of waste generation over waste treatment, the same impactful fractions, waste management that has a small but positive impact. There are some differences that could be interesting to investigate. The fact that the carbon footprint will really differ depending on the fraction considered, and depending on the fraction you consider, recycling might yield more or less benefits. There's also specific local factors that have an impact on the carbon footprint. We saw the energy mix or the actual composition of specific fractions. And still, even though waste management does not have a huge impact. There's some factors that are important, so how you treat residual waste, but also what kind of recycling routes you go for. For instance, closed-loop recycling, like bottle-to-bottle for glass packaging, is much more impactful than open-loop recycling. And reuse, especially reuse, has a very much more strong impact, a very stronger impact than recycling, for instance, for WEEE or for textiles. And Donald already introduced some limits. We know that there are underreported quantities, as I mentioned. And data is a bit of a limit of the exercise because, well, we are missing data, for instance, for the actual composition of critical fractions. It's difficult to get a clear composition of textile waste, for instance. So usually you have to use regional or national data, and you might miss a bit of local factors in there. Also for recycling, the actual use of recycling routes is more or less well known at local level because there's sometimes lack of transparency of the recycling streams. So there's also some limit in that, and in some territories also the mixed fractions are less well documented. So there might be some carbon footprints that we're missing in there. So when the quick question is what to do to reduce the carbon footprint by 25%, well, the easy thing to say is to focus on key fraction. And as far as we know, it's mostly about prevention and reuse if we really want to make significant improvement. If you choose to only focus on 3 key fractions, then you should set reduction targets depending on the territory, ranging between 30 and 50%, which is massive. It's not something that we have experienced anywhere. We tried to investigate the potential of recycling, and actually one of the participants asked to have an idea of how much it would help to increase recycling up to 90% for critical fractions like plastic, food, and glass waste. And reaching this target, which is quite impressive for all those fractions, only would lead to a reduction of 10% of the carbon footprint. So there's a potential, but if you want to reach a 25% reduction, it's unlikely that you'll only achieve that with recycling. What we see is that many also interventions are outside of the scope of local and regional authorities. So it's also the question of, let's say, intervention that tackle more eco-design of production that might be outside of the scope of cities and regions. We've got a list of concrete actions. I'm thinking maybe I'm running out of time, so I won't go into all details, but there's some publication that ACR Plus produced in the past years looking at food waste prevention, depositing and refund systems for packaging or textile waste management. And we could identify some more concrete intervention that would lead to increased reuse or prevention that are worth investigating. Might be interesting to say that those interventions might fall in the scope of waste management or not. It might be intervention that you rather put in, let's say, food policies or other policies, but there's still a potential for local authorities to make a difference and to better align waste management with climate change. And in general, like key conclusion, it's mostly waste generation and composition that will make a difference when it comes to the carbon footprints. Waste management has a limited impact, but we see a potential still in improving both quantities and capture rates, and to be a bit more picky about the recycling routes and to go for the more carbon saving ones. In general, the key recommendation, if you want the waste policy to be as aligned as with climate change mitigation as possible, is to follow the waste hierarchy. And in general, I think that envisioning waste management within a circular economy approach, so considering waste prevention at first, but also what to do with the sorted materials, what strategy there is to optimize reuse and recycling, this is the way to go to get better performances in terms of climate change mitigation. And beyond the results, some question that the campaign still pose. That one thing is that we were not sure when starting the campaign how similar the results would be, but we see that there's a clear pattern, a clear common pattern among participating territories. So we think that those findings are transferable to other contexts. When it comes to try to use a bit less weight-based approach when it comes to waste management and more environmentally based approach, it's possible, but it's challenging to operationalize and getting the right data, making the calculation right. It actually took much time, so we're still not sure to proceed to better equip local authorities with that. I also already mentioned the fact that many interventions when it comes to prevention might fall out of the scope of waste management, but we see lots of potential with reuse, for instance. And one challenge that we identify is the finding of the campaign show that we should go for more prevention and reuse, but there's no legally binding targets at EU level on that. So there might be a tendency for a decision maker to first comply with those legally binding targets, focusing on recycling, and not consider prevention and reuse targets. So this is also a limit when it comes to addressing climate change with waste management. Well, this is it for my presentation, and thanks for your attention. Gail, I give the floor back to you.
Yes, thank you, Jean-Benoit. So with that, we are closing the first part on the campaign. I don't know if someone has questions in the audience on the campaign itself, obviously. If it's more on this conclusion, maybe we can also keep them a little bit for the round table. I don't see any hands. Okay, so we'll continue actually, and now we'll dive into something, if I can say, more concrete, or at least we'll know more on the point of view of the participating territories, because so I will welcome Philippa. As Jean-Benoit said, the country of Ireland was part of the campaign, was a member of the second cohort, so that started in 2021. Now Philippa will present a little bit a different angle, but still going back on the campaign, but also rather how Ireland prepared its climate plan, which I think, Philippa, you will correct me if it was in 2024. And
yeah,
with that, the link also with the waste plans that was also developed not that long ago. So you can, you're already sharing your screen, Philippa, so you can continue.
You can all hear me?
Yes.
Great. So the title was Encompassing Climate Change Within a Waste Plan, the Experience of Ireland. And I guess the first thing we need to look at is kind of what our climate action plan says about waste. So we've had several versions of Ireland's climate action plan, and the most recent update was in 2024. And that basically said that greenhouse gas emissions from waste were mainly concerned with landfill. And, some of the data you've seen there, seeing the impact of landfill on the emissions. Gains in reducing material use and substituting virgin materials with cycled materials will be credited back up the supply chain, but minimising waste generation, improving segregation, reuse and recycling lead to less emissions associated with waste transport and treatment. Now, our document said that waste emissions per head are lower in Ireland compared to the EU average, but I've had a look at this, and apparently it's not really the case anymore. So, and that was only published in 2024. So I think we'll have to delve into that one a bit more. So the key policy tools that they say have been successful so far in Ireland are the landfill levy in diverting waste away from landfill, the widespread segregation of waste, capturing recyclables and biodegradable waste, industries supporting recycling operations, and of course our own regional waste management planning. And as well as that, in 2024, we introduced a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles and aluminium cans. So that is also going to have a very big impact as well. And you'll see why I don't talk about plastic, even though it was one of the main themes that came out in our report. So to achieve our targets, all these areas need improvement, particularly developing better prevention strategies, improving capture rates, reducing both contamination and the amount of non-recyclable material. You know, it's all kind of saying a similar thing. And, you know, we worked with the Scottish person at the time, which was Sambi, and Jean Benoit was involved in producing this report. So basically the report said that the 2019 carbon impact of municipal waste in Ireland was about 5.3 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, or 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent per capita, which, you know, is fairly significant. And to achieve a 25% reduction by 2025 as part of the ACR plus More Circularity Less Carbon campaign, we must reduce our carbon impacts by approximately 1.3 million tonne carbon dioxide equivalent, which is a very big amount and requires a lot of work. The number of scenarios that the report focused on were basically around prevention measures, and it explored pathways for us to achieve that in 2025. So we considered all of that in our development of our plan. So before we actually went at our plan, we did an evaluation of the current plans. There was 3 plans, 1 for each of the regions, but the evaluation outcome, it was agreed that plans would become 1 plan, so that would be 1 national plan for Ireland. And obviously, as we started the process, we had the results of the carbon footprint process. We did our pre-draft consultation in 2023. Then 2022, we did our consultation on the actual plan in 23, and we published in 2024. So what we got was, you know, before we did anything, we did a huge amount of engagement, you know, because you have to remember, in Ireland, waste is not collected by the municipalities, it's collected by the private sector. So we had to do engagement with our key partners, our key stakeholders, and the local government sector. Our key partners would be things like the Environmental Protection Agency and the government departments. The key stakeholders would be all of those things like the extended producer responsibility schemes, and the whole Irish Waste Management Association, which are representatives of all the people involved in contracting and collecting municipal waste in Ireland. So we did a set of facilitated themed workshops, and we covered consumption, because obviously that's huge in terms of us reducing our carbon number, capture, and also compliance. We have to make it easy for people to comply with what we have currently in the legislation. Ireland is obviously quite a prosperous country and tends to be still growing at a reasonable rate. And that brings its own challenges. And those challenges are things like more consumption, which produces more waste, more pressures on our virgin resources, more dependence on export for treatment of our waste. So we require more infrastructure in Ireland. And anybody that's tried to get new infrastructure in Ireland will know, or in any other country at the moment, you'll know what it's like. No one wants new waste infrastructure right beside them. In terms of responses, in the plan, we have to consider more prevention, more reduction, the big one, more reuse, more recycling, and more facilities. And obviously the challenges will be also dealt with our national policy, and the plan will do with the actions on the day-to-day basis that we're going to help with all of those things. So what we called it was the National Waste Management Plan for a Circular Economy. And that goes from 2024 to 2030 for a 6-year period. So that's a first plan that just didn't say National Waste Plan. It's the first plan that actually embraced circularity. So it's broken up into volumes to make it easy. The first volume is the current situation and challenges. The second volume is the real engine of the plan. It deals with our policy responses and actions, and we look at that in a little more detail. Then the third volume of the plan is our delivery roadmap, and that's like the fuel to accelerate that engine to move on a little bit faster. Our volume 4 is just more detailed data and stuff that was used in the plan. Our volume 5 is then our strategic environmental assessment and our Natura impact report, which are the statutory environmental documents that are required for the report. So then if you looked at our plan in numbers, is it to make it very easy for you? We have one overall plan ambition. We have 8 national targets. We have 13 core policies, 16 focus areas, and associated with those 16 focus areas, there's 74 targeted policies and 85 priority actions. So in terms of the other volume, there's volume 3, it has 51 key deliverables, and that deals with anything with organisation or making the easy movement through the priority actions. So just to look in a little bit more detail, and you remember that the carbon footprint report said, you know, prevention was best. So we set ourselves a big overall ambition, 0% total waste growth over the 6 years of the plan. Woo! How are we going to do that? So we need to maintain the waste management and behavioural advances we've made. We really need to accelerate that transition to a circular economy. And a big thing in Ireland, we need to influence sustainable consumption. We need to improve the capture of all waste and optimising circularity. So we want to capture the materials at the earliest stage possible. And hopefully that's what our new deposit return scheme is doing. Apparently the quality collected at a reverse vending machine is much better than the quality collected in a mixed dry recyclable system. So hopefully that will have some impact on us going forward. And obviously, as I say, you really have to make it easy for people to comply with our policy and legislation. Our current baseline is 2.7 tonnes total waste per person, because that's not just about municipal, it's municipal and construction, demolition and industrial waste. So just looking at some of the other targets, we've set ourselves a 6% reduction in municipal waste per person by 2030. So our baseline at the moment is 370 kilos per person. And obviously we're pushing to do that in a lot of ways, and you'll see a bit more when we look at the focus areas. Then in terms of C&D, I know it doesn't have such a big impact on the projects that you've been all looking at, but we're looking for 12% reduction in C&D waste by 2030. Our baseline at the moment is around 9 million tonnes. But you're thinking, oh my God, you've set yourselves a very tough target there. But our Environmental Protection Agency in 2024, they published national criteria for soil and stone to become a byproduct. So all of the soil and stone waste that's currently there will be moving out of the waste and into byproducts. So that should really help us and assist us in reaching this 12% target over the next 6 years. Now, in terms of the dry recyclable bin, and you know, now a lot of the plastics and aluminium are gone out of there. We're hoping that we will get a better compliance in terms of the recycling bin. We want to get up to 90%. We only want to have 10% contamination in there. The contaminant rate varies between different collectors at the moment, so we're trying to decide on what the average will be, but there looks like there's at least more than 10%, at least 10 to somewhere between 10 and 20% on average in that dry recycle bin. So then in terms of our residual bin, this is not really good news for us, because in terms of our household baseline, only 36% of the right materials were in our residual bin. And in terms of the commercial waste, it was worse. Only 26% of the right materials were in the residual bin. So what was in there? Food waste that shouldn't have been in there, recyclables that shouldn't have been in there, textile waste that shouldn't have been in there. So we're setting ourselves a very high target here to get up to 90% compliance with that residual bin in the next 6 years. So it's going to be a lot of work, and you'll see a little bit of that going forward. In terms of all the EU targets, obviously, they're all included in our plan. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go through those individually because everybody knows what they are. And that includes that 50% reduction in food waste. It includes the recycling targets that are there currently, the packaging waste targets, the landfill target, the single-use plastic targets, and all the WEEE and battery and ELV targets as well. So those are all included in our plan. Now, I mentioned we had 13 core policies in the plan. And actually, this is the first time we've had a core policy that deals with climate action. So the climate action says we support the delivery of the measures and actions prescribed in the climate action plan to contribute to achieving the national climate targets. So we want our national waste management plan for a circular economy to contribute to the overall climate action targets that are set. And we do that in a way that we have evolving targets in Climate Action 1, and that includes all future versions as well, because you'll find that that will be probably reviewed again next year and probably set further targets for us there as well. So as our document's in place for 6 years, we don't want to be changing things, so we have incorporated that into it. So as I said, we had 16 focus areas. 4 of those are operational focus areas, 6 deal with material streams, and 6 deal with infrastructure. So just to have a quick look at how we've set out our focus areas. We give what the purpose is and what it is. This one we're just looking at is municipal commercial waste. And then it has a set of targeted policies and a set of priority actions. And then within that priority action there, you'll see the one that I've highlighted is to collaborate with other agencies to develop and deliver targeted awareness campaigns and projects to improve behaviour on prevention, reuse and repair in non-household settings. As you can see from what we said about our residual municipal waste, our commercial sector is very poor. So we need to do a lot of work with them. So, you know, and we also kind of do our continuous work with the households as well. And we have a lovely website, which you're all are invited to look at. It's called mywaste.ie, and we have all our assets that we use to let the public know about our campaigns are on that. One that we ran earlier this year was Take a Minute Before You Bin It, to make people think before they put the things in the wrong bin. And we've done a lot of surveys in this, and there's very interesting information about why people put the wrong things in the wrong bin, but mostly because they're in a hurry. And then for the commercial sector, we have a whole page dedicated to them. They can download posters for their bins, stickers for their bins, their free booklets. They can order labels for their bins. There's animations there to show them, especially because some of these places, the staff turnover is quite big. There's testimonials from people who've used this labeling system. And we have circularity training called Modus as well for people that are more interested in in-depth circularity and circular economy training. So that one of the other areas, and Jean-Benoit mentioned this, that textiles are one of those big areas of impact. So we set a whole focus area on textiles, and we had targeted policies and priority actions there as well. And in the carbon footprint report for Ireland, it said we should have a more detailed breakdown of textiles. So we had a priority action then within our plan to assess and define the extent of existing textile collection options and infrastructure, including the network of registered charity outlets, and define the challenges and barriers and gaps to progress. So we've done an awful lot of that work already, and we've actually issued a report to our Department of Environment, and they recently published a government policy on textiles, which went out for public consultation. That consultation period is now closed, so we expect that we will have a new textile policy for the country within the next couple of months, which will include obviously extended producer responsibility scheme for Ireland as well. And I think that's the only way we're going to make a big difference with the textiles. Then in terms of our final volume of the plan, it's our third volume of the plan. It actually has a section called Regulatory Impacts and Climate Impact. So we have a whole section dealing with climate impact at the moment. And on top of that, then we have a number of key deliverables. The first key deliverable that we're just going to look at is key deliverable 43. So you can see there was a lot more key deliverables before that. Some of them dealt with more simple things about organisation and governance. So what it says is the local government sector planning and circularity pillar will produce an annual work plan with emphasis on the acceleration of the transition to a circular economy. Because as you know, I think where the waste plans meet the climate action is really through that circularity. So key deliverable 45 then is about the local government sector will evaluate the impact of the local government sector work plans on circularity and climate action annually. So big job for us there. And then in terms of our annual report, the local government sector will produce an annual report on the progress of implementation of the plan, including evaluation of the impact of work plans on circularity and climate action. So we have to measure these things annually, and we have to produce a report annually as well. So in terms of the actual work plan itself, We produced our work plan last year, and we decided it would be very tight to have a report because we only published the plan last year in March. So we decided we'd do a work plan starting last year and ending at the end of 2025 to give ourselves a chance to get the data together, to see where we're going, to implement some of our priority actions in that period. We chose 3 areas of emphasis for our first work plan. The first one was organisation and resources, because obviously we mentioned there things like pillar 1. So we have a pillar 1 within our organisation structure that deals with circularity and infrastructure and planning, that's waste management planning. And we have another pillar that deals with all the enforcement and regulation aspects of it. And then we have an overall group that deals with our key stakeholders. So it was really important that we get all of those in place first, so that we have a lot of the tools for us to move on and to monitor our progress. The second area, was obviously waste prevention and waste presentation, because as you can see, we have a lot of problems there in terms of how people are presenting the residual waste in particular. And for the last sort of year, we've been pushing people on making sure they all have organic waste bins. And actually, as a result of more people having organic waste bins, our contamination rate for the food waste bin has gone up. But that's a matter of us educating and doing more awareness on that now that people have their brown bin, because a big problem for us in the previous years was people saying, well, we don't have a brown bin, but now everybody practically has one. And obviously the third area is circularity. Obviously, we can only really measure our own contribution to circularity, because obviously if you look at the circularity rate for Ireland, you'll see that we're very low, or less than 2, and compared to the EU average. And but we extract a lot of materials in Ireland, and we also have a lot of cows and grazing in Ireland. So that actually causes a lot of methane as well. So in that first work plan, we will, the implementation of the plan itself, that'll include continuous analysis of material flows and waste streams, because they're the key indicators of achievement of the plan ambition and targets. We really want to see if we're getting anywhere close to that 0% waste growth, because that has to be there every year for us to achieve it on the 6 years. Obviously, we'll have an annual report. We'll be publishing that in Q2 next year, and we're considering the options for the carbon footprint measurement, including the Zero Waste Scotland updated tool. And we've been convinced by one of the members there of Zero Waste Scotland that we'll be able to do an awful lot with that tool. So building on what happened with the previous report, we're hoping that we will be able to continue with that. So that's it from me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Philippa. Well, I think we'll, at least from ACR Plus, I will definitely keep an eye on you, and especially for this external strategy and the next steps of the plan. As we're not really really late, but I will give maybe all the questions, if there are some, for after our third part, which we want to have more like a discussion between the 5 speakers. So yes, before starting with it, so where we'll talk about binding targets, prevention policies, how can we act better. So I'm inviting Marie-Jeanne Gardner from Reuse and Manon Jourdan from Zero Waste Europe to join us, to join Philippa, Jean-Benoît, and Donald, and we'll be discussing. But before, so both Marie-Jeanne and Manon, if you can just give us some insight on your position on that, starting by, I think we say by Marie-Jeanne, please.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation to speak, first of all, and maybe I can start by introducing Reuse, who we are and what we do. So Reuse is the EU's largest network of social enterprises that are active in the circular economy, in particular in repair and reuse. We represent over 30 members organizations across the European Union, and our members work with in total 27 waste streams. So quite a big overview, but not waste per se, just to give a bit of background. And members as social enterprises, it means that they work in particular with people that are distanced from the labor market. And by doing so, they have both an environmental impact by reusing and preventing waste, and also a social and economical impact by providing local jobs and training opportunities to people. And I also wanted to give you a bit of a figure from the network on CO2 emission saving. So we measured that every year, in total, our members managed to avoid, through reuse, the emission of 110,000 European citizens. So maybe it's difficult to imagine what it concretely represents, but we can imagine that this is a big impact. And in terms of the link between circular economy and climate change mitigation, this is something that has been recognized by the European Commission, which is really presenting the circular economy as a tool to decarbonize our society. Recently, I read a report from the French Agency for Environment, ADEME, which analyzed that reuse can actually reduce CO2 emission by up to 80% compared to manufacturing a new product. So clearly, as has been said before, circularity is key to drive to decarbonization. And not only, because it can also manage to reduce water consumption and emission linked to transport, for example, by avoiding the extraction of primary materials and the production of new goods. And here, this is something very important, because the fact that circularity can drive decarbonization is only true if we really focus on waste prevention and reuse, and not recycling. As Jean-Benoit said already, all saving come with reuse, and this is very true. And beyond this, what is even more true is that we can only succeed in this if we succeed in the replacement rate, meaning that if we reuse, we really avoid the production of a new good. And this is, first of all, not easy to measure and not easy to link directly, but it's really key. And here I wanted to share another figure from a member, a French member of Reuse, Envie, which focuses on the repair, refurbishment of electronics. And they recently published a report where they highlight the different saving per type of products. And for example, they showed that refurbishing a washing machine, if it avoids the production of new equipment, again, prevent the emission of approximately 379 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. So again, a high impact. And the question is also about binding targets for reuse, and I'm going to explain a bit more later. But as a first statement, obviously, binding resource use reduction targets for waste prevention and for reuse are really critical, but they really need to be the first basis to then drive circular economy policies and also the necessary funding to finance and achieve these targets. And beyond this, they also need to be linked with social objective and a social dimension to make sure that we achieve a just transition. And I think I will then stop for now and explain later in more detail.
Yes, definitely. We'll have more time in this. Manon, could you also give us the view of of Zero Waste Europe? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, first of all, and the insightful presentation. I had originally planned a few slides, but based on the limited time, I think I will stick to as Marie-Jeanne, as she did, I will stick to a small speech. So the first thing I would like to say is perhaps, again, presenting myself and Zero Waste Europe. So my name is Manon Jourdan. I'm Waste Prevention Manager. And I guess many of you here around the table know Zero Waste Europe. We are a network of about 37 civil society organizations based in about 29 countries. The groups we are working with, so our members are themselves working on zero waste policies, the implementation of zero waste policies, And a big part of our work, obviously, advocacy at the EU level, but also at the local level, trying to push for change, working with cities, but also businesses, so helping those to really deliver on zero-waste policies. So something that was said previously, I think by Jean-Benoît and again by Donald, was the fact that there is a gap currently in our understanding of the climate impact of waste management, but also on the benefits that zero-waste strategies can bring. And so one thing that we realized, I mean, a long time ago, but now more and more, is the need to not only quantify the carbon footprint of our waste activities, but also the potential benefits in terms of saved or avoided emissions, which are achievable if we would change our practices and start focusing more on prioritizing prevention and reuse. So we need to get better, I think, at quantifying those avoided emissions, thanks to prevention policies, and try to also get better at identifying at the city level, for example, what is in my competence as a local government to really like have an impact on both reuse and prevention. And I think maybe something that Philippa said in her presentation, that sometimes it's a bit difficult to understand where exactly we can act. So maybe by avoiding avoiding the production or the purchase of certain items, such as the most impactful one, like single-use packaging, textile, also food waste, and of course reuse systems. So we've been trying to do so at Zero Syrup in the past 2 years through a few projects really focusing on single-use packaging, because currently it's a hot topic among local governments. And while obviously textile and food waste are also very key, we realize that single-use packaging is often an entry door for local governments to start acting. And so we have 2 projects currently. One is elevating reuse in cities. Don't get confused by the name, because even though we talked about reuse in the title, we are focusing mostly on prevention of single-use items. And the other project is the Reuse Vanguard project, which is really about trying to understand the enabling conditions and requirements needed to scale up citywide reuse systems. And so in both projects, we really tried to cover that gap. So first, trying to really understand what cities can do, what do they have in their power to prevent waste, so single-use waste, single-use items, and to reduce the dependency on single-use items. And the second gap is to connect more and more those prevention and reuse policies to their climate benefits. Maybe to give you just a brief snapshot of the type of policy we're talking about and we have identified. We're talking about embedding zero single-use criteria in public procurement. So trying to help local authorities understand what are the single-use items that they are heavily relying on their daily operation that can be avoided and phased out. So maybe from municipal workplaces, internal events, but also public buildings. The second thing is the promotion of reusable nappy programs, or it could also be the promotion of reusable menstrual items, especially among vulnerable communities. The third action that we have identified as within the competence of a local authority is the promotion of zero packaging consumption through local incentives. When I'm saying by zero packaging consumption, embed both reuse system, but also refill and bring your own. So yeah, so this can be done by implementing some local incentives or taxation reduction for example, for local shops which are promoting bulk selling. The fourth action could be, of course, the mandate of reuse in all public events. And we saw that this is something that starts coming more and more, and it's often seen as an entry door for scaling up reuse and in other fields like the HoReCa sector. And that's why also like piloting reuse system in the food and beverage sector can be seen as a fifth action. A sixth action could be like introducing and installing more and more refill stations to reduce bottled water waste and promote obviously tap water use, which should be made in a safe manner, because obviously we have now all this news about PFAS in water. So I think we also need to promote filtered water along with the fact of promoting tap water. Seventh action could be like in Barcelona, creating more and more smoke-free zone, because obviously like the litter of cigarette butts is quite problematic. By saying that, I also would like to connect again to the topic, which is again the climate benefits of this action. We've been saying, and I mean, Philippe said it, Jean-Benoit presented it as well in the results of their report, that prevention and reuse seems to be, when we look at data, the ones providing the most climate benefits in terms of avoided emissions. And so we also recently introduced a carbon calculator, which we've been using to help the cities which commit to become zero waste via our certification, to try to understand which of their zero strategy, which of the zero strategy would lead to the most climate benefits. So this calculator basically is based on two things: a baseline emission scenarios where the city can input specific data on the current waste management activities, so on waste generation, composition, current management practices. It's also based on the life cycle assessment, so quite similar with the tools that you guys have presented. And then we, based on this baseline assessment, we model zero waste scenarios. So again, I think it's quite similar in terms of methodology, and we try to assess the input that we try to understand which changes in terms of waste prevention, reuse initiatives, improve recycling rates. What would that lead in terms of emission reductions? And so we experiment on the tool different strategies, and we try to quantify the potential impact before implementation. And so we have applied that tool recently to Barcelona. And just to give you a few figures, because Barcelona also has considered implementing zero waste plans. In the meantime, there's been like a change of political party in Barcelona. So, but still, it's still a good way to promote the impact of zero waste strategy. So we realized that the baseline data of Barcelona were quite bad, because based on 2021 data, we would see that they had a separate collection rate at roughly 41%, 1.23 kilogram of waste generated per person per day. And this was kind of, the residual waste was primarily sent to MBT plants and then either landfilled or incinerated. All of this was equivalent to about 172,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year, so which is more or less equal to the emissions of 30,000 Europeans, so it's quite substantial. With organic waste and residual waste, again, as the largest contributors. So based on this baseline, we used, again, the carbon calculator tool, and we tried to model the changes that could occur in terms of carbon emission reductions through the implementation of 7 concrete actions, and with a focus on waste prevention, reuse, and repair. I'm not going to go through them all, and Gael can again share the slide after that. But basically, and this is not going to be a surprise for none of you, what we realized is that, the most impactful activity in terms of emission reductions is waste prevention. And so if the city was implementing those 7 actions that we have listed, and I can share the study after as well, the annual emissions could go down more than 187,000 of CO2 equivalent per year, which would basically mean that the city of Barcelona would not be a net emitter anymore, and would actually generate savings around 14,000 tons of CO2 per year, which can also accumulate over years. So it's great. And maybe just to finish, because I see that we are running out of time, one thing I wanted to say, that we have identified the gaps, right? So trying to understand the benefits in terms of carbon avoidance, emission avoidance of our zero waste strategies. This is something we have to get better at. And I think the next step would be to try to translate those climate impact into financial terms. So really to use climate finance to help cities generate, so cities which are net zero, for example, or cities who are actually saving on carbons, to help them monetize that, to make those policies bankable. And I think this would be maybe the next step forward. Yeah. And I'm leaving the floor back to, I don't know.
Maybe, but then because it's a lot on local level, which we need. But just to come back a bit to the question also regarding targets, like which concrete targets would you set, so more national, European level?
Yeah.
To help improving, and why now it's not getting there?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm always a believer of the importance of legally binding targets. And I think also what Marie-Jeanne said on having binding resources use reduction target, or like target on plastic consumption or certain item consumption, so to set like a threshold, that would be quite useful, I think. We have recently with the PPWR, we saw that we have now reuse targets for certain categories of packaging, and also packaging reduction targets. But yet, I think this is not enough. I think more than target, what we need is to level the playing field for reuse and prevention. So if we keep having like very cheap single-use items, and now I'm just talking about single-use, but it could be the same with like cheap textile items, like if the default option is always the less sustainable one, and then every time you need to implement a sustainable change, such as implementing reuse systems or preventive action, it's actually costing you more. It's not going to work. So what we need more than target is to make sure that we have enabling framework, so good regulatory framework and good market conditions for the best solution to thrive. And this is something that I think we still need to explore. So yeah, I would answer this way. More than target, what we need is perhaps good economic measures that level the playing field for the right solutions. Yeah.
Marie-Jeanne, would you agree with that? Or you?
Yeah, it's going in the direction that I wanted to go. I would really agree with Manon that we need these targets, especially like binding one at EU level, to make sure that member states have guidelines and a framework. And most importantly, these targets for reuse have to be separate from recycling to make sure that we deliver the right incentive. And that's why I think this should be the basis. So we have the target, and then we deliver the means to actually achieve this objective. So in terms of funding, for example, free PR schemes. So these targets should be embedded in extended producer responsibility schemes. And we absolutely need sufficient funding for this. And we already have proven experience in many waste streams, especially, for example, taking the example of the electronic waste sector, where we see that there is a huge gap in financing preparing for reuse. Most of the time, in many member states, reuse is not financed by EPR schemes in WE. So we need full cost coverage of all costs, and we need also funding that is in line with the waste hierarchy. So to make sure that we give more money to the most environmentally solution, and also the one that help decarbonize the most. And we also need to have specific funding for this. And also something that would be really useful would be to ensure inclusive governance with the actors that drive reuse and preparing for reuse, to make sure that they really have a say in these policies, and like the actors would really drive the changes, that they would be able to have decision making in this. That's more like for the EPR schemes part of things. But then when it comes to other instruments, for example, green public procurement, now we're talking a lot about municipalities, so they have, and like local authorities have a big role to play here. For example, by setting reserve tenders for reuse, also for social enterprises, to really give the most opportunity to actors that prioritize reuse. Something that is also key is to ensure that we now switch to the best quality price ratio as the default option, and not the cheapest price. So that's quite important. Now looking at another economic instrument at the EU level, now we're starting to talk more and more about VAT, because the Commission is planning to review the VAT scheme for second-hand product. And here we for us, it's key to, first of all, yes, reduce VAT for repair and reuse product, but also to make sure that we show the importance of the social sector here by making sure that social actors can have 0 VAT rates, and to account for the benefits that they bring. And finally, I would like to end with like these were measured more like on waste and on waste management, but we also have to link that with eco-design and going even beyond eco-design, because of course we need to have the best quality and most durable product on the markets and phase out the least durable ones, but we also need to really find ways to kind of regulate overproduction and stop the like harmful production practices. And there are ways to be explored there to do so. For example, again, looking at extended producer responsibility schemes, if we would really penalize the worst practices through EPR schemes, for example, through eco-modulation by putting really extremely high fees depending on criteria such as overproduction or the frequency of renewal of collection, for example, when it comes to textiles. So these are things to be explored to tackle all the phases from production to end of life management. So to answer your first question in a very short way, yes, targets, but we
but
need
not
more.
only. Okay, I see that actually we have a comment in the chat from Estefania, I think from Municipal Waste Europe, that you obviously know, that saying that she agrees that there's a need for more efforts for prevention and reuse, but that public authorities can do little. So that's a bit going in your sense also, that it's also national authorities, but above all retailers and producers that need to be active. But actually, we're lucky today to have we can have the point of view of local authorities, because we're here with Philippa and Donald. So maybe Philippa, I don't know, what's your reaction on all that? And as a public, maybe it's a bit going beyond just your presentation on the, but yeah, how do you feel? And still, you can give us your input about you know, how is it possible to move beyond only recycling and
Yeah. We definitely think that yeah, we need to get beyond recycling, and we know that that's going to have the lowest impact, but we still need to get what we're doing there right at the moment. But like obviously our biggest aim is to produce less waste, and you know, not to produce waste in the first place. But how do we do that? And if it's all about extended producer responsibility schemes, I think that's going to be very difficult. I know that sometimes they are the best option, and I would agree that we definitely need one on the textiles, but you know, how do we manage that? It's going to take a couple of years to get there. So in the meantime, we're going to be producing more and more of this very low quality waste because of the amount of this material being brought into the country. So do we need to put some big tax on very, you know, materials that are not very sustainable? You know, the one-use Shein and Temu projects that are coming in every day to Ireland, like, you know, and then when they're back out in the textile bank a couple of weeks later, and they're of no value, like, you know, they're very low value. So is the extended producer responsibility going to deal with that, or do we need some other economic measure very soon to deal with that? So I'm thinking that there's something there that we can do in terms of the local authorities ourselves. Like, you really have to help your social network to build up that are really, they're the people mostly involved in the reuse area. But if you don't promote that at the start, this will not be possible to procure within the local government, because we did an exercise not that long ago of refurbishing an office with all secondhand furniture, but the social enterprises weren't really set up for procurement from our sector. You know, so that made it very difficult. So we need to build up the sector to allow for reuse first, before we set too many targets, you know. I think that's kind of like the money should go to that part of building up reuse. and getting reuse businesses and getting secondary products available for use. And I mean, one of the examples someone gave there was about the washing machine. I mean, that's just like striking. Like, and you know, if you look at the amount of white goods that are leaving our country because they're not all recycled within the country, it's actually a very big figure. So if we were to even set a target on that area, it would be something. So I kind of hope that we don't try and do too much too quickly, and that we kind of look at the big impact streams as like Jean-Benoit mentioned earlier, the textiles and the plastics and possibly the WEEE. And if we took just those three and work with those instead of trying to do an overall job, then that would be possible. And we are really trying hard in the local government on that reuse part with for events. And like, even to do that, there's only one washing machine in Ireland that can reuse or wash reusable cups, glasses, all of those things. So this is where we're starting from. And if we would like all our local authorities to do this, like, it would be impossible at the moment. So we have another social enterprise that we're funding to get a new washing machine and start the ball rolling with more local authorities. That's the starting point anyway.
That's the starting point. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess it wasn't such a, also like for you, because you set some targets. So how was the process for you? How did you manage then?
To set the targets?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, it took a lot of work. And we worked on this project for like over 2 years on the actual targets to set them right. And we had to be sure that it was possible to meet those targets before we set them. And that's why, like, I mean, one of the most difficult targets we have is the 0% waste growth, you know. At least it's per person. I mean, obviously our population is increasing all the time. So, you know, we're hoping that at the end of the 6 years that we're continually giving out messages. And I mean, I think one of the other things that maybe we don't have enough at the moment, we have a separate climate action team, and it's the same across the European Union. There's climate actions a little bit separate from waste management circularity. They need to kind of get together a lot more because there's funding for this and there's funding for that. And I think we'd get better value for money if we sort of worked very closely together. And we're looking at a few initiatives around that over the next year as well. So hopefully that will help as well. But it's not going to be easy. The messaging has to be constant that you're having an impact on your climate. But one of the things we have noticed is that when you put a climate message in there, people definitely listen, you know. They understand impact on climate. So that's good. And they're beginning to understand circularity as well. We're now up at 64% of people in Ireland have heard about circularity. So all good, going up.
Getting there.
Yeah, getting there, yeah.
And then, of course, I'm moving to our last guest, to Donald, because still with this point of view of public authorities. And for you now, you have the tool. And this tool, like for you, how did it help you to understand what are the priorities and where you should work, and maybe also how was it really how you used it to clarify this message that I think is very important to get across?
Yeah, I think that the real advantage of something like the carbon metric and now the SWIFT tool that I talked about, it really throws that focus on reuse and moving things away from just focusing on waste management. And we see that you know, in our own policy landscape, we had the circular economy route map published recently in Scotland, which as one of its two of the main features were on well, one was on reuse and really focusing how we can drive reuse and increase reuse, and another was on focusing on food waste. So these are really two insights that came from looking at the impacts of our waste rather than just looking at the tonnages and looking at the life cycle impacts of our waste. So I think that's definitely helped those discussions in the policy landscape in Scotland, and then moving towards our new tool SWIFT, where we look at other environmental impacts. I think that has also meant that we are now conscious of these other environmental impacts when looking at how we're going to monitor the circular economy, for example, going forward, and what other things we should be considering, just so that we, I guess, create more reasons to advocate for the circular economy. You know, if people might be very concerned about biodiversity, for example, I think it's important that we also can talk about circular economy's impacts on that, and the benefits of circular economy policies on biodiversity. And yeah, so I think these are really important moves, and it's good to see that sort of policies is being influenced by the kind of tools and analysis and results that we're putting out there.
Mm-hmm. And just well, sign up, but there is one comment from Bishal Bahri from AIT. So I don't know, and like saying that actually those tools have quite a great potential. He's from the ASEAN region, and yeah, just highlighting that. So I a bit like attract your attention on that, you can say, and the same also saying that stakeholders need to be really aware of the potential of climate mitigation. We already at the scheduled end of the webinar, but I don't know. I don't want either to cut like that the discussion. So I don't know if you have someone else would like to bring something else, or if then we can. There is Manon shared also the advocacy push. I see. So you can please read the chat to see it. We will link it also on the event website afterwards. So if yes, if there is no additional inputs, I think I will close here this session, this webinar. Thank you all for joining us today, and obviously a very big thank you to our speakers. I hope it was interesting for you, and that we'll have an opportunity to continue the discussion, actually, because this is really just touching some aspect of it. With ACI Plus, it's for sure something that we do on a everyday basis. As I said, the webinar was recorded, and we will be sharing the recording and the presentation later on. So thank you, and have a nice rest of afternoon.